My manager was late 47 times in 3 years. I know because I opened the restaurant when he didn't show up, covered his shifts, handled his responsibilities, never said a word. Because that's what assistant managers do, right? We pick up the slack. But the one time I was late? 10 minutes. One time. Traffic accident. Called ahead. And I was fired on the spot. We have standards, he said. Standards that apparently only applied to me. Not to him. Not to the owner's nephew who showed up hungover twice a week. Just me. The guy who worked 70-hour weeks on a 40-hour salary. The guy who never complained about coming in early or staying late. The guy who made that restaurant run. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been documenting everything. Every extra hour. Every skipped break. Every time I was told, salary means you work when needed. And that documentation? It was about to turn their double standard into a very expensive lawsuit. My name is Daniel Torres. I'm 34 years old. And for 3 years, I was the assistant manager at Riverside Grill in Tampa, Florida. A mid-sized restaurant. Nothing fancy. Casual dining. Steaks, seafood, burgers. The kind of place families go on Friday nights. I started as a line cook 6 years ago. Worked my way up to assistant manager. The owner, Frank Morrison, promoted me with a promise. You'll be on salary. $40,000 a year. But that means flexibility. Sometimes you work more. Sometimes less. It balances out. It never balanced out. I always worked more. My manager was Steve Carlson. He'd been with the restaurant for 8 years. Frank's brother-in-law. Which explained a lot. Steve was lazy. Showed up late. Left early. Called out sick constantly. And I covered for him. Every time. I didn't mind at first. I was young. Eager to prove myself. Thought that working hard would lead somewhere. But after 3 years of 60 to 70-hour weeks on a 40-hour salary, I was exhausted. Burnout. And starting to feel used. Still, I said nothing. I needed the job. My wife Maria was in nursing school. We had rent. Car payments. Student loans. I couldn't afford to rock the boat. Then came that Tuesday morning. I left for work at my usual time. 6:30 a.m. The restaurant opened at 7. I was always there by 6:45 to prep, check inventory, make sure everything was ready. But at 6:40 on the interstate, traffic stopped. Complete standstill. I could see flashing lights ahead. Accident. Multiple cars. Emergency vehicles blocking lanes. I called Steve immediately. 6:45 a.m. straight to voicemail. I called the restaurant landline. No answer. He wasn't there yet. I left a message. Steve, it's Daniel. There's a massive accident on the 75. Traffic's completely stopped. I'm going to be late. Maybe 15, 20 minutes. Sorry. I sat in traffic for 25 minutes. Finally got moving. Arrived at the restaurant at 9:10 a.m. 25 minutes late. First time in 3 years. I walked through the door expecting maybe some teasing. Sleeping in, Torres? That kind of thing. Instead, Steve was standing by the host stand. Arms crossed. Face red. You're late. I know. I called. There was an accident on. I don't care. You're the assistant manager. You're supposed to be here on time. Steve, it was a traffic accident. I couldn't. That's unacceptable. You're fired. I stared at him. What? Clean out your locker. You're done. Steve, I've been here 3 years. One time. I'm late one time because of a traffic accident, and you're firing me. We have standards. If you can't meet them, we need someone who can. I looked around. The kitchen staff was watching. The morning servers. Everyone could hear this. Standards? I said. You've been late 47 times in 3 years. I've covered for you every single time. Steve's face got redder. That's different. I'm the general manager. I have more responsibilities. Now get your stuff and leave before I call the police. I wanted to argue. To point out every time I'd opened the restaurant because he overslept. Every shift I'd covered. Every weekend I'd worked while he golfed. But what was the point? He'd already made up his mind. I cleaned out my locker. 3 years of work. a spare shirt, some paperwork, a coffee mug. It all fit in one plastic bag. As I was leaving, I passed Frank Morrison in the parking lot. The owner. He was getting out of his luxury sedan. Designer sunglasses. Golf clothes. Tuesday morning, and he was coming from the course. "Daniel," he said, surprised. "Why are you leaving? We just opened." "Ask Steve." "He fired me." Frank frowned. "Fired you? Why?" "I was late. Traffic accident on a 75. 25 minutes late. First time in 3 years." Frank looked uncomfortable. "I'm sure there's more to it than that. Steve wouldn't just." "He did. Just now." "We have standards," he said. "Well, I'll talk to him. But Daniel, you know how it is. We need reliable people." I stared at him. Reliable. I'd been there every morning for 3 years. Covered countless shifts. Worked through holidays. Weekends. Sick days. Never complained. "Yeah," I said. "I know how it is." I got in my car and sat there for a long time. Not angry. Just empty. 3 years. Gone. Over 25 minutes. When I got home, Maria was studying at the kitchen table. She looked up, surprised. "You're home early. Everything okay?" "I got fired." "What? Why?" I explained. The accident. The traffic. Being 25 minutes late. Steve's reaction. Maria was furious. "That's insane. You've never been late. You work constantly. They can't fire you for one time." "They just did. This is Florida. At-will employment. They can fire you for any reason." "Any non-discriminatory reason," Maria said. "But this? This feels wrong." Over the next few days, I applied for jobs. Updated my resume. Reached out to contacts. But I kept thinking about what Maria said. It felt wrong. Then I remembered something. About a year ago, I'd started keeping notes. Not detailed records. Just rough notes on my phone calendar. Times I arrived. Times I left. Steve had been pushing me to work more hours. "Salary means flexibility," he'd say. I started tracking my time just to see how much I was actually working. I pulled up my phone. Scrolled back through the calendar entries. And started adding things up. 65 hours one week. 72 another. 68. 70. It kept going. Week after week. Month after month. I grabbed a notebook and started calculating. If I was salaried for 40 hours but consistently worked 65 to 70 hours, that was 25 to 30 hours of overtime every week. Federal law says salaried employees who make under a certain threshold are entitled to overtime. I looked it up. The threshold was higher than my $40,000 salary. I should have been paid overtime. For 3 years. I did the math. Roughly 25 hours of unpaid overtime per week. Time and a half rate. 52 weeks a year. 3 years. Over $90,000. I called Maria over. Showed her the numbers. "Daniel, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure about the hours. I'm not sure about the law. But if these numbers are right, you need to talk to a lawyer." The next day, I met with an employment attorney. Her name was Rachel Klein. She had an office in downtown Tampa, specialized in wage theft cases. "Tell me what happened," she said. I explained everything. The job. The salary. The hours. The firing. I showed her my phone calendar with the notes about my arrival and departure times. Rachel reviewed it carefully. "This is good. But do you have anything more detailed? Time cards? Schedules?" The restaurant uses a scheduling software. Managers can access employee schedules. I used to make the schedules sometimes when Steve was out. "Can you access it now?" "Probably not. I'm fired." "What about your personal records? Did you keep anything else?" I thought about it. I have text messages. Steve would text me asking me to come in early or stay late. I have emails too. From Frank, asking me to handle things on my days off. Get me everything. Every text. Every email. Every calendar note. Every piece of documentation showing the hours you actually worked. Over the next week, I compiled everything. Screenshots of text messages. Can you open tomorrow? Need you there by 6. Stay late tonight. We're short-staffed. Come in on Sunday. Emergency. Emails from Frank. Daniel, I know it's your day off, but can you check on the delivery? Steve's unreachable. Calendar entries showing I'd worked 67 days straight at one point without a day off. I sent it all to Rachel. She called me 3 days later. Daniel, this is solid. Really solid. Based on your documentation, I'm estimating they owe you approximately $93,000 in unpaid overtime wages over 3 years. 93,000? And that's conservative. We're only counting the hours you specifically documented. There's probably more. Plus, under federal law, if an employer willfully violates overtime requirements, employees can recover double damages. So potentially 186,000. I couldn't speak. There's more. Florida law requires employers to keep accurate time records for all employees. If they can't produce those records, the court can accept your documentation as evidence. I'm betting they don't have detailed records of your hours. What do we do next? We send a demand letter. Outline the violations. Demand payment. Give them 30 days to respond. If they don't pay, we file a lawsuit. The demand letter was sent the following week. Certified mail. To Frank Morrison and Riverside Grill. 2 days later, my phone rang. Frank, Daniel, what the hell is this? A demand letter for $93,000. It's what you owe me. Unpaid overtime for 3 years. You were salary. Salary employees don't get overtime. Below a certain threshold, they do. I looked it up. Federal law. I was entitled to overtime and you never paid it. This is ridiculous. You're trying to extort us because Steve fired you. I'm trying to get paid for the work I did. 3 years of 60, 70-hour weeks. You owe me. I'll fight this. You're not getting a dime. Then we'll see you in court. Frank hung up. Rachel filed the lawsuit 3 weeks later. Federal court. Violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Wage theft. Demand for unpaid overtime plus penalties and attorney fees. Discovery started 2 months later. Rachel subpoenaed Riverside Grill's employment records. Schedules. Time cards. Payroll documents. Everything. What came back was revealing. The restaurant had almost no detailed records of my actual hours worked. The scheduling software showed I was scheduled for 40 hours per week. But there was no record of when I actually clocked in or out. Because I was salary. They didn't track my time. That was their mistake. Under federal law, the burden shifts to the employer to prove how many hours an employee worked. If they can't, the court can accept the employee's reasonable documentation. Rachel presented my phone calendar, my text messages, my emails, all showing consistent patterns of working far beyond 40 hours. Riverside Grill's attorney argued that my records were self-serving, that I could have fabricated them. But Rachel had something else. Witness testimony. For former employees who'd worked under me, all willing to testify that I was always there, opening the restaurant, closing it, working weekends, holidays, covering shifts. One of them, Carlos, had been a line cook. He testified that I'd worked 67 consecutive days during one summer when Steve was on vacation. Did Daniel ever complain? Rachel asked. Never, Carlos said. He just did the work. Another witness, Amanda, a former server. Daniel was the reason that restaurant functioned. Steve barely showed up. Daniel did everything. The defense tried to undermine their testimony, suggested they were bitter former employees with an axe to grind. But their stories were consistent, and they matched my documentation. The case went to mediation after 6 months. Court ordered. We met in a conference room. Me, Rachel, Frank, his attorney, and Steve. Steve wouldn't look at me. Frank looked angry. The mediator outlined the situation. Mr. Morrison, the documentation presented by Mr. Torres is compelling. If this goes to trial, there's a strong likelihood he'll prevail. The question is how much? This is extortion, Frank said. This is wage theft recovery, Rachel countered. Your employee worked over 800 documented hours of unpaid overtime. Federal law entitles him to compensation. We offered him a salary. He accepted. A salary below the overtime exemption threshold, which means he should have been paid overtime regardless of his title. That's the law. The mediator turned to Frank. Mr. Morrison, even if we take the most conservative estimate of hours owed, you're looking at a judgment of at least $90,000. Plus penalties. Plus attorney fees. That could push this to $200,000 or more. Wouldn't it be better to settle? Frank and his attorney huddled. Whispered conversation. Finally, Frank looked up. We'll pay $75,000. Final offer. Rachel looked at me. I nodded. We'll accept $110,000, Rachel said. That includes back wages, reasonable penalties, and attorney fees. That's our counteroffer. More whispered conversation. Then Frank's attorney spoke. We'll agree to $95,000. But Mr. Torres signs a non-disparagement agreement. He doesn't talk about this case or the restaurant. No, I said. Everyone turned to me. No non-disparagement clause. You stole my wages for 3 years. You fired me for being late one time. You want to settle? Fine. But I'm not signing anything that stops me from telling the truth. Rachel smiled slightly. You heard him. $110,000. No non-disparagement. Or we go to trial. They settled for $110,000. The agreement was signed 3 weeks later. After attorney fees and taxes, I netted about $67,000. Not the full amount I was owed, but more than I ever expected to see. But the money wasn't the point. Not really. The point was that they couldn't get away with it. Couldn't fire me for being late while stealing 3 years of my time. 6 months after the settlement, I heard through former coworkers that Riverside Grill was struggling. Word had gotten out about the lawsuit. Employees started asking questions about overtime. 2 more former assistant managers filed similar claims. The Department of Labor launched an investigation. Found systematic violations. Found the restaurant. Required them to pay back wages to multiple employees. Frank ended up selling the restaurant 18 months after my settlement. I heard he barely broke even after all the legal fees and back wages. Steve? He was let go during the ownership transition. New owners wanted their own management team. As for me, I used part of the settlement to help Maria finish nursing school. Invested the rest. And I got a new job. Restaurant manager at a different place. Better pay. Better hours. And a boss who actually respects labor laws. I'm not working 70-hour weeks anymore. I'm working 40, sometimes 45, but I'm paid for every hour, overtime included, and I still keep detailed records. Not because I expect trouble, but because I learned something important. Your time is valuable. Your labor has worth. And when someone takes advantage of that, when they demand more and more while paying the same, when they expect you to sacrifice without compensation, you document everything. And when they push too far, when they fire you over 10 minutes after stealing 3 years, you make them pay for every hour they stole. Frank called it a salary, called it flexibility, called it what the job requires. I call it wage theft. And the court agreed. That 10-minute traffic delay cost me my job, but it cost Frank Morrison $110,000. Plus legal fees, plus a Department of Labor investigation, plus his reputation. Was it worth it? For me, absolutely. Not just the money, the principle, the message that workers can't be exploited indefinitely. Steve thought he was teaching me a lesson about punctuality. Instead, he taught me something else. That employers who steal your time will keep stealing until you make them stop. And sometimes, all it takes is a notebook, a phone calendar, and a lawyer who knows the law. 3 years of stolen wages. 1 lawsuit. $110,000. Standards, Steve called it. I just called it justice.